Yes, and it's a story about mosquito who thinks that people actually really like mosquitoes
How did they get to think that?
because they believe that people are clapping for them.
Oh, that's wonderful. Hello, Barbara Lewis here with Singing After 40. Today I have the great pleasure of speaking with storyteller Gail Nyoka, who is also an award-winning playwright. Gail writes for theater, radio, and oral performance. Her previous work has been shortlisted for international awards, and Mella Mella, her play for young audiences, was the winner of the Chalmers Canadian Play Award. Gail was born in Trinidad, grew up in London, and has lived in Wales, Canada, and the US. Here is our conversation. So, Gail, wonderful to see you. I know you've been traveling, but I want to kind of go back to sort of the beginning and talk to you about how you became a storyteller and what does it mean to you to be a storyteller?
Well, I started off as a playwright and a writer for young people. And I found that I was invited to schools. Um, and I very quickly found that I needed a different approach for appearing in front of children. And I couldn't stand there and read. So I started to bring in more of a story as I told the story, if that makes sense. Make it a bit more not just off the page. And then I got a job as the administrator at Storytelling Toronto, which was just wonderful because I met all kinds of storytellers and I took courses there. And I just fell in love with the oral tradition, how it brings to life what you want to say. And I like particularly the traditional stories, the fairy stories, the folk tales. Um, there's a lot of depth in them, and you can take them at a surface level, but they speak far below the surface. So
Yes.
that's what I got into, and I found that became my main creative outlet was
Mm.
oral storytelling. Although I still do theatre, which I love also.
Theater as aside from telling a story in a theatrical way, so you do both. You have both in your life
Yeah,
right now.
well, theatre, I write for theatre.
Yes.
So I do not act. I think storytelling and acting are different skills, even though there is some
Into the
crossover.
air again and flew westward until they saw beneath them a calm and peaceful lake.
So I find that I can stand on a stage and tell a story and take on characters as part of that story in a certain way. But it's not the same as becoming a character in a play. I write my theatrical story and then the actors take over and the director takes over.
Your part is done. I understand that you perform a story based on a figure from the history of Zimbabwe. Can you?
Oh, yes, I love that story. And the figure is Nahanda.
Yeah.
And the reason I came to know about Nahanda is because I had a play performed that was set in Zimbabwe. And I found that Zimbabweans would come up to me and they'd say, "Do you know about Nahanda?" And I said, "No." I started trying to find information about Nahanda. There wasn't very much I could find at the time. And eventually I met a man from Zimbabwe who knew the story very well. And we got together and we made a storytelling piece about Nahanda. I took on the role of Nahanda and storyteller, and he took on the role of Kaguvi, who was a fighter at the time. They were fighting for freedom from the British. The British were just coming in taking over the land and the people. Nahanda was a spiritual leader more than anything. And I believe the name was a title rather than her actual name. And it was a long time before the British managed to find her and eventually hang her. And she never did capitulate to their demands and, become a Christian and all of that, even though Kaguvi did, but they still hanged him anyway. So, doing that didn't do him any good at all. So, yeah, I really did like that story. And because my partner in the writing was from Zimbabwe and he was Shona, he brought in some of the language, he brought in some of the ritual elements.
Well, you travel a lot, and I know that you collected stories in Ghana from the Ewe people in the Volta region. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I went there because a friend of mine had lived in Ghana, and she said, the stories are not being told. They're being forgotten. The young people just are not interested. And she hooked me up with a guide over there. There are countless local languages, even though English is the main language. In the villages, people don't always speak English or not that well. And they speak their local languages. And he knew maybe 7 of the local languages, but there are a lot more that he didn't know. So in a couple of places, he had to find a translator so that he could translate those stories. Most of those places, they just hadn't told those stories in a very long time. And you see the young people, the teens, kind of hanging out somewhere else looking scornful. And
they become more modern, I assume. Can you give us just a sense of a story? You don't have to tell us a story, but just like what would one of the themes have been?
One of the stories was about how the Ewe became their own community and how they escaped from a tyrannical ruler. And they did it by secretly making a hole in a wall and walking backwards out of this hole. Appeared to be going forward when they were going backwards. Out. Yes.
Oh, that's fun.
They actually are spread across the Volta region and into Togo. But because of the colonization, there were the French group in Togo and the English group in Ghana.
So would you say that was a very productive trip for you? Did you get a lot of stories at that time?
I did get a lot of stories. Yeah, there was another one from a village called, and I've forgotten the name of the village. It was one of the few places that kept their storytelling traditions. One of the stories from there was how, when the missionaries came and they wanted everybody converted, there was a group of people who refused to be converted. And it was because of these people that they kept the stories and they kept the ecology of the land, because what happened was the people who thought they were being modern or whatever started cutting down the trees. They started disrespecting the land. Wow. And things started going badly. And it was these few people who said, no, stick to our traditions, stick to the way things have been, restore the land. The monkeys came back because the monkeys had disappeared. And it seemed that when the monkeys came back, the fortunes of the village revived.
That's a strong message. Wow.
Yeah.
To keep your stories, you also keep the ecology. Very strong message.
Yeah. That was Tafiatomi. That was the name of the village.
The village. Oh, good name.
So I wish I had spent more time there, but we tended to spend only a couple of days in one place and then move on. So. This year I was at the Borderlight Festival, which is a really fun festival which includes different arts. They had a woman who told poetry, and she had slides in the background, and I really enjoyed her presentation.
Hmm. And you told a story of your own there, something you had written or something that you found in
Oh,
another country.
the first part of my set, I told stories from Ghana.
Ah.
And then the second part of my set, I told a story that I had written, and it came from an experience I had when I was in Ghana. It was on the coast where I had been to a couple of the forts where the captured people were imprisoned before being shipped across to the Americas. And I was in the cell where the women had been kept.
Oh,
And
that's
I
haunting.
just had this experience of such pain,
Mm.
such heaviness that seemed just to be within that cell. It was overwhelming, that feeling. And then I thought, well, I am going to write a story from the perspective of a woman in that cell. And so that is the story I told as part of my set. So the
Mm.
first part of my set was lighter. It was some of the lighter stories that I had heard in Ghana. And then I switched to this story, which was
Whoa.
quite heavy. So
Heavy. Do you have enough in your mind to maybe give us the first two lines of the story just to set it up?
I start as the woman, I think. No, I start as myself.
Okay.
And I say something along the lines of, this is the story of a woman I have named Essie. She has set her story upon me and given me her name.
Mm.
And then I switch to being her. And she says, she kind of looks in the direction where I had been and says, huh, so she thinks she can tell my story.
That's good.
Yeah.
More recently, you've been at the Maroon Conference in Trinidad. It sounds wonderful. Tell us a bit about that. And I believe you also told a story there, and tell us a bit about that too.
Well, I had written a story about the beginnings of the Maroon community in St. Vincent, which is the island that my father was from. And I only learned quite recently that, first of all, much about him and about the Maroon connection with him. And so I wrote a story of, and it's been disputed. Some historians say, well, I don't think this could have happened. But I think if the story is there, there's truth in it. And so I tell the story from the standpoint of a shipwrecked woman from one
Mm.
of the slaving ships who gets rescued by the indigenous people of St. Vincent, and there was quite a big community of they used to be called Black Caribs, but now it's the Garifuna. The name Caribs is not really used anymore. Um, I think it was considered a colonial name put upon the people. So I did this of the beginnings of the Garifuna for the conference. And I wanted to hear a lot of the stories there. There were people from Belize, Haiti,
Oh, wow.
uh, Suriname, and I learned while I was there that there were quite a number of Maroon communities in the southern United States that we just don't learn about. And in the War of 1812, some of these fought for the British. When the British lost the war, they provided ships for the men and their families who had fought for them. And a lot of them went to, I think some went to Nova Scotia actually,
Mm.
a lot went to Trinidad and you will find in a part of Trinidad areas that are known after the companies of the soldiers. So, this is the first company town and the
Oh,
second
wow.
company
Oh,
town.
interesting.
Um,
Are there themes that are similar? Are they like what you told us about Essie for one and the shipwrecked woman for another? These are very emotional. Are these the kinds of stories that you're hearing, or is it a wide range of themes?
There is a wide range, actually. And I found in Ghana that there were some very cute and funny stories. I put them together in an ebook,
Oh, yes,
which I
that's right.
call Voices of the Ancestors, Stories and Law from Ghana's Volta region. When I put them in the book, I pretty much translated them straight as they were told. But I find that when I tell them myself, it's just my little spin on things, I suppose.
That
Uh,
makes sense.
because they tell a story about how the animals get together and they really need to find a solution to stop people from killing them. Yes, and it's a story about mosquito who thinks that people actually really like mosquitoes
How did they get to think that?
because they believe that people are clapping for them.
Oh, that's wonderful. Oh, I love that. I've
Um,
never heard that story.
No, it doesn't seem to be widely known, so I do
No.
like to tell that story and people enjoy it.
How do you prepare yourself, or do you need to prepare yourself? Like when you become Essie, for instance, I choose her because you just talked about her. Do
Yeah.
you, is that deeply emotional for you? Do you have to become her in a way?
Yes, I do. And I have to kind of find where she resides within me
Oh, interesting.
and try and think the way she would think. Give her that kind of attitude of, well,
Yes. Right. Good
she's
luck
not
to you.
really me.
Telling my story. If you were to give a hopeful storyteller some advice about how to prepare to tell stories, uh, what would you say? Would you have a piece of
Um,
advice?
I would say just know your story very well and give it your own approach. There's a basic story, but then you need to find something that speaks to you. And if it speaks to you, it will also speak to your audience who you're
Mm.
telling it to.
Okay.
Mhm.
And what is next for you? What's coming up?
I have an idea for another play for young audiences. Yeah, I really like writing for young people. I like that you can just make your stories so magical. And at the same time, there is something in there that is serious that can reach them on another level without being didactic, you know.
Mm.
And the reason I wrote my play about Mela initially was because I saw the story from Zimbabwe and I thought, I wish I could have had these stories when I was young.
You won the Chalmers Award, didn't you, for
Yes,
storytelling
I
for this?
did. Yeah. The basic folk tale I had to add to make it a stage play that would work is that and young people should know about. They should know about the stories of Africa
Mm.
and the people of Africa.
Mhm.
And, I had to wait until I was an adult to find this. And so I am starting a new children's play. And
Wonderful.
I think I'm going to be putting down some of the stories that I heard at the Maroon Conference
Oh,
in
okay.
Trinidad.
When you do sift through and you do write, please let me know and I will let people know about it. Thanks so
Yes, well,
much,
thank
Gail.
you. Well,
Okay.
thank you for talking to me.
It was a great pleasure.